Hello and welcome to a slightly different Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I'm going to look through the article or an article of Colonel Douglas MacGregor because lots of people have asked me what my thoughts about him are, and I have no thoughts about him. Or I've had previously very few thoughts about him because I know very little about him. So just without having read his article, it's going to be a live stream of consciousness reaction to his article. So that could be interesting. Um, let's find out a little bit about him. So, what I do know is that he has featured on Fox News quite a bit and RT Russia Today, which straight away makes me think he's probably positioned around the sort of Republican MAGA anti aid to Ukraine stance. So, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, these people in America. So I know half of the people watching this who are American will be Republican. I'm almost certainly. If you're interested in war, you're interested in sort of the kind of sense of national identity and so on and so forth. There's almost certainly will be a number of you who are favouring Republican politics. But within Republican politics, there's quite a lot of stuff going on at the moment, and there's a bit of a division between old school economic, fiscal conservatives and this new strain of sort of pro-Trump MAGA uh, republicanism, which is it's actually very different. And this is summed up by the people who really want to support Ukraine, and as a contingent of the Republican Party who don't want to support Ukraine for various reasons. They say we should be supporting the border and all this kind of stuff, it's putting money into building a wall rather than helping Ukraine, all that. So there's a division in the Republican Party, and I think McGregor, and I know very little about him. It probably sits on that MAGA end. He was so in 2020, President Trump proposed him as the ambassador to Germany. In fact, let's look at that because that was a bit controversial. So on July the 27th, 2020, the White House announced Donald. So the reason I'm going through this is because we need to understand where he's coming from before we look at what he's written, because what he's written will obviously be a reflection of who he is. So let's do a little bit of understanding of who he is and where he's coming from. The White House announced Donald Trump's intent to nominate MacGregor as a US ambassador to Germany. Following the announcement, MacGregor's history of controversial remarks received media attention. Okay, straight away, he's seen as controversial. So that's a big thing to note. He has asserted that Muslim immigrants, referred to as Muslim invaders, come to Europe with the quote with the goal of eventually turning Europe into an Islamic state. End quote. MacGregor has argued that the German concept of Bewältigung, used to cope with Germany's Nazi past and its atrocities during World War II, is a quote sick mentality. Oh, holy wow. Okay, well, what is Vergangenheitsbewältigung? It is it literally means a struggle to overcome the past or working through the past. The German term describing the processes that since the later 20th century have become key in the study of post 1945 German literature, society, and culture. So this is how they process and deal with the problematic, traumatic events of the Second World War, of Nazi Germany, and the kind of remorse, of their own country's complicity in war crimes, in the Holocaust, and the related events. In the sense of work, can refer to the psychological process of denazification, with the accession of the former German Democratic Republic into the current Federal Republic of Germany in the reunification in 1990 and the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. It can also refer to coming to terms with the excesses and human rights abuses associated with that former one-party state. And he's saying that's a sick mentality. So he's saying the fact that you are coming to process that terrible part of your history and to come to terms with that is somehow sick mentality. This is okay. There are loads of alarm bells going straight away with Colonel MacGregor. Now, here's an interesting thing, I love it when thoughts come into my head and connections. So Vlad Vexler, who is a philosopher, a Russian philosopher based in Israel, go and check out his channel. Absolutely brilliant. Although I haven't watched it for ages because I'm so busy. But I remember he talked about one of the problems with Russia is they haven't processed their own atrocities and their own issues through the Soviet regime. That's really interesting because without having come to terms with them, they're not seeking to get over that period of their history, which means they're still in that history. They're still doing it. This is still part of, this is an extension what Putin is doing of that Soviet period, including the horrible authoritarianism, the autocracy, and the war crimes and the human rights abuses and all of that. They haven't processed the horror of that before and said that was bad. Let's move on to a new place where we recognize that as being bad and we deal with that. They haven't had that process. That is still in their national identity, and therefore there'd be this cognitive dissonance of like having this horrible part of national identity there and still thinking they're decent, nice human beings and their country is the best in the world and all that kind of stuff. And that causes a dissonance in their minds that's not been resolved yet. And you end up in a place like this. So fascinating. So anyway, slight sidebar there. But if MacGregor is thinking coming to terms with your horrific past is a sick mentality, I would have moral issues with MacGregor, like straight away before I'd known anything he said. And I know nothing about what he said about Russia. I know nothing, right? I've not looked into him. But straight away, I know I fundamentally disagree with this guy. But there you go. So MacGregor has also stated that martial law should be instituted on the US-Mexico border and argued that extrajudicial execution of those who cross the border at unofficial ports of entry. In other words, any either asylum seekers or illegal immigrants should be executed. I'm going to show you the moral compass in a minute because this is really interesting because actually, even though he's a former colonel in the US Army, this guy is seemingly exceptionally authoritarian and exceptionally on the side of brutal, activity and brutal ways of dealing with people that he sees as not in his in-group. MacGregor has also made statements in support of Israel having defensible borders, the annexation of the Golan Heights, and the decision to move the US Embassy to Jerusalem. In a column in the Washington Post by Max Boot, he was described as, quote, a racist crackpot who is pro-Russia. Okay, so you can say what you like about the Washington Post, you might disagree, but he is pro-Russia. Like, that's what everyone seems to be telling me. I mean, again, let's make up our own minds. Anti-Merkel, anti-Muslim, and anti-Mexican, end quote. His nomination stalled in the Senate Committee for Foreign Relations on January 3rd, 2021. His nomination was returned to the president under Rule 31, paragraph 6 of the US Senate. So he wasn't made an ambassador because he was too controversial. So this is a guy who's making comments on the Russian war, or the Ukrainian war, and he's already pro-Russia, it seems. Now let's look at the wiki entry for his Russian invasion of Ukraine. So after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, MacGregor appeared on 3 Fox News programs to speak in support of Russia's actions. Russian state television broadcast excerpts of MacGregor's appearances, which included a characterization of the Ukrainian President Zelensky as a, quote, puppet, that Russian forces had been, quote, too gentle in the early days of the invasion, and that Russian President Putin was being demonized by the US and NATO. So okay, he's got sympathies with Russia. He's got sympathies with Putin. And he appears to be anti-US and anti-NATO as a former advisor to the White House. It's an odd position. And MacGregor said he believed Russia should be allowed to seize whatever parts of Ukraine it wanted. Ooh, goodness. Right. Okay, so that's broadly against everything that I've been saying on my channel. After one of his appearances, MacGregor's comments were characterized by veteran Fox News Pentagon correspondent Jennifer Griffin as appeasement, and that he was being an apologist for Putin. After Griffin's remark, Tucker Carlson, so if you don't know, Tucker Carlson is very much a right-wing populist commentator on an opinion maker on Fox News. He's not really news, he's more opinion, who hosted MacGregor on 2 successive nights, remarked, quote, unlike many of the so-called reporters you see on television, he is not acting secretly as a flak for Lloyd Austin at the Pentagon. No, Doug MacGregor is an honest man. He may be an honest man. He's just got the wrong idea about reality. Dowdy, another Fox News host who interviewed MacGregor, said his viewpoint was, quote, stunning and disappointing. US Representative Liz Cheney, so Liz Cheney, who is a super conservative, but not a fan of Trump, and was ousted because the Trump supporters didn't like her for calling out Trump and being anti-Trump and wanted him investigating for the January the 6th insurrection. So she is now no longer a representative, but she said of MacGregor, this is the Putin wing of the GOP. So the GOP, Grand Old Party, is a Republican Party. So some of you who are Republican are going to be having your hackles raised here as being, oh dear, we've got some liberal going off on this guy. But you need to understand where he's coming from, because there are lots of different flavors of republicanism and conservatism, and he is a particular strain that I will place for you now. So instead of thinking about left-right politics, right, which is far too simplistic and is thoroughly problematic, and I don't think does a job of explaining anyone or anything, but we use it far too often. I use it an awful lot, but I shouldn't really. It's much better to use a political compass. Politicalcompass.org, get on there, take a test, see where you end up on this compass. So someone like MacGregor is going to be really high on the authoritarian scale, which means that if you're a libertarian, political libertarian, which means it's all down to the individual should be their own kind of god in a sense, then, you know, he's not your guy. He thinks that you can't move beyond a border. You should be executed if you move. He thinks I don't know where he sits economically, but he's probably going to be against the government getting involved too much. So he'll probably sit over in this quadrant. Now, it's really interesting as a bit of a sidebar here. It's really interesting that people get libertarianism wrong in politics in both America and the UK. So when you look at, I don't know, the UK general election 2019, this is where the political compass put the UK political parties. Now, interestingly, they've put UKIP up here on the top right-hand corner. Now, that means that they are both right-wing economically and kind of authoritarian. Now, UKIP labelled themselves as a libertarian party. Now, I'm not having a big anti-UKIP rant here. There will be a lot of you who are pro-UKIP. But I just want to explain, I've actually written several articles on this, which is to say they claim they're libertarian, but they actually advocated absolutely non-libertarian policies. And this is the same for America. So you get a lot of people holding up Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, which is like the Bible of libertarianism. Okay, but she was, what was she? She was a first-generation illegal immigrant from Russia, Ayn Rand. She believed in bodily autonomy and the free movement of people. So proper libertarians believe that people should be able to free to move. Like the most obvious human freedom is a freedom to move. So when you look at the actual Libertarian Party in the States, right, the Libertarian Party, in their manifesto, in their kind of like DNA, is freedom of movement of people. So if you were a Libertarian Party, if UKIP claimed they're a Libertarian Party, but you're against free movement of people in Europe, then you're not a Libertarian Party. If you're against bodily autonomy, being able to do what you want with your own body, you're not a libertarian. You're not a libertarian. You are a libertarian in certain areas, but you're cherry picking your libertarianism. So therefore, this is why UKIP have been placed not in the libertarian, because actually they have quite authoritarian stances on what rules should happen, on whether the government should stop you from moving, whether the government should stop you from, I don't know, having an abortion or whatever. Anyway, that's the UK scenario. For Americans in the audience, let's look at the last election, and this is fascinating. This is where Biden's been put. So you guys in America really have a go at the left if you're on the right, right? But you forget that your left in America, the Democrats in America, if you compared them to the European left, are not left. They are, broadly, we see the Democrats as centrist. In some aspect, the corporate elements of the Democratic Party, they are right of centre. So only when you start getting to the progressive wing do you start moving over here, right? But Biden himself isn't left wing. He will be called left wing by people on the right, but he's not. Anyway, point of showing you all this is questioning where MacGregor sits here and how this is reflected in these sorts of things he's writing and the positions he's advocating. I would guess that being in the army and being at the top in the army, you're going to be authoritarian. I could never be in the army because I'll be questioning every single command. It's like, yeah, but really, is that a sensible thing to be asking of me? Because I can say, is that just your subjective opinion, or is it there's an objective reality? You know, philosopher in the army is obviously ridiculous. So obviously, I'm going to be sitting somewhere down here. Um, but MacGregor, on the other hand, will not be. Now, does this go some way to explain his position on Russia? The fact that he appears to be authoritarian? Almost certainly. Trump is authoritarian, which is why he's always taken a liking to authoritarian leaders such as Kim Jong-un and Putin even. You look at the Helsinki speech he made where he supported Putin over and above his own intelligence services, which is one of the most controversial things Trump probably ever did. Uh, uh, and and therefore, you know, if you understand someone's predilections for authoritarian rule and autocracy, you can understand who they would. They prefer Zelensky, who's trying to get a fresh new democracy going and hold people to account democratically, um, or or do you prefer Putin, who's like a strongman leader, bare chested, you know, the Russian bear? A lot of preamble. Here's the actual bloody article. The American Conservative. So, first of all, this is in the American Conservative. Make of that what you will. The national political and military leaders who committed America to wars of choice in Vietnam, the Balkans, Afghanistan, and Iraq did so as a rule because they were convinced the fighting would be short and decisive. That's interesting. So, none of those wars were short or decisive. So, if he's comparing those to Ukraine, I don't know what he's going to say here. If he's comparing those wars to Ukraine, he's already comparing things that didn't work out as they were intended anyway. So this is already it's a problematic comparison. American presidents, presidential advisors, and senior military leaders never stop to consider the national strategy, if it exists at all, consists of avoiding conflict unless the nation is attacked and compelled to fight. America has not done that. America has not avoided conflict. The war hawks in America and the long history of their involvement in democratic processes in South America, in something like 17 countries in South America alone, I think, since the Second World War, shows that they are not afraid to get involved in a conflict. They don't avoid it. The latest victim of this mentality, I mean, that's already problematic, is Ukraine. In the absence of a critical root and branch analysis of Russia's national power and strategic interests, American senior military leaders and their political bosses viewed Russia through a narrowly focused lens that magnified US and Ukrainian strengths, but ignored Russia's strategic advantages, geographic depth, almost limitless natural resources, high social cohesion, and the military-industrial capacity to rapidly scale up its military power. Wow, there's a whole lot of wrong in there. First of all, in the absence of critical root and branch analysis of Russia's national power, the US has been doing that for ages. I mean, that's what their intelligence services, that's the last 50 years of 70 years of their intelligence services. Well, that's absolute hand wave there. It was the US intelligence services and the UK intelligence services, the only two that knew that Russia were going to invade at the beginning of the conflict. So, I mean, that's incorrect. That, and then he's almost waxing lyrical here about how wonderful Russia is. It's got geographic depth. Yeah, it's a big country. Okay, meaningless. Almost limitless natural resources. Yes, it has a load of natural resources, but as you can see now, you can screw them over. High social cohesion. I guess it kind of does, but you look at what's been going on in Buryatia and the lack of kind of respect given to the Eastern, sort of particularly Mongol societies or communities over in the East. I'm not sure that's necessarily true. And if you look at what's happened to Russia over the USSR over time, it was kind of a lack of social cohesion that led to the breakup of the US to some degree. I mean, it's hugely complex, but you got all sorts of different nations that were kind of wanted to break out. But I guess what's left of the Russian Federation, you probably do have some degree of social cohesion, but that is imposed upon them, right? When you don't have the freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom to protest, social cohesion is something of an illusion. So I'd say that social cohesion is just not is enforced, and diversity and difference has not been allowed to fulminate and to come to fruition. The military industrial capacity to rapidly scale up its military power. Well, actually, it hasn't had the ability to do that. We imagined it would, and it didn't. And in fact, Ukraine has held Russia. So that's precisely wrong. That's just flat wrong. Okay, so I don't rate MacGregor already. Ukraine is now a war zone subject to the same treatment the US armed forces inflicted on Germany and Japan during the Second World War, on Vietnam in the 1960s, on Iraq over decades. Power grids, transportation networks, communication infrastructure, fuel production, and ammunition storage sites are being systematically destroyed. Millions of Ukrainians continue to flee the war zone in pursuit of safety, with ominous consequences for Europe's societies and economies. Okay, what's going on here? So is he saying that the US are destroying power? No. Okay. So he's saying Russia are destroying power grids, transportation networks, communications infrastructure, food production, the rest of the military. But and he's saying Russia are doing that. Why are we? I guess he's saying, why are we whinging about that? Because the US did that in all these other places. Yes, the US have done terrible things. Let's not judge. So this is, again, a sort of two court quay fallacy. I've talked about this before. So this is fallacious thinking. Let's forget. Imagine the US doesn't exist now as a nation, right? It doesn't exist, hasn't ever existed. Russia are hitting all these civilian power structures, transportation networks, blah, blah, blah. Is that good? No, it's not. Is it a war crime? Yes, it is. Okay. Let's forget that. This is whataboutery. Let's forget that the US has done that before in previous wars. US has dropped 2 atom bombs on cities, right, full of civilians. Murder on gargantuan scales. It's absolutely morally reprehensible. You can look at it in pure utilitarian terms and say it was worth it because it stopped more people dying eventually. But again, that's kind of like, that's a hypothesis and a guesstimation. We're not 100% sure that would have happened. And as well, before you did that, it was kind of a hope that that would happen. Here we got MacGregor saying, America being terrible before, stop having a go at Russia for doing that now. No, both can be the case. America were terrible before, and Russia are terrible now. But that's gone and been, and there's nothing we can do about that. This is now, and there's everything we can do about this. So again, thoroughly disagree with you. Meanwhile, the Biden administration repeatedly commits the unpardonable sin in a democratic society of refusing to tell the American people the truth. Contrary to the Western media's popular Ukrainian victory narrative, which blocks any information that contradicts it, Ukraine is not winning and will not win this war. Holy wow. So, okay, he's saying something as fact. Will not win this war. So he's talking about a future state of affairs, as if that is set in stone. They will not win this war. Well, if you don't help them, no, they probably won't. But if you help them, they've got every chance of winning. So this is almost like a circular argument. We shouldn't help them because they will not win this war. So we don't help them. Look, I told you they wouldn't win this war. Yeah, because we stopped helping them because you said they weren't going to win the war. Oh, I see what's going on here. Ukraine is not winning. Highly controversial. Right, if you look, so what is it? Russia now occupy 50% of the territory that they occupied earlier on in this war. Is that winning? What they've done to Severodonetsk, flattening it, Mariupol, flattening it, to liberate it, is that winning? What's his definition of winning? And the idea is that we help them so that they win. And in fact, that Ukraine, compared to the second greatest army in the world, as it was supposed to be, have done what they've done is absolutely astounding. You know, even if they don't win, so they're going to lose with style. You know, they're going to lose holding their heads morally high by not giving up. But I don't think they will lose because, and this is, oh, MacGregor, you're so wrong. Putin can't win. I've written an article on this. I've shown you that article before. Putin cannot win. He couldn't win back in April when I wrote the article. All those things still remain true. Putin cannot win. There is what would it look like for Putin to win now? You can't walk into a country that don't want you to be there, that doesn't want you to be there, a population that doesn't want you to be there, and expect to win them over by enforcing your imperialistic rule upon them. Just beggars belief. Like, Putin cannot win because you cannot. There is virtually no decent example in modern times where a country has been invaded by another country completely and has been totally won over by them after a big, horrible, terrible war, and thought that the country that invaded them were were this wonder savior. It's not going to happen. Predictably, NATO's European members, which bear the brunt of the war's impact on their societies and economies. No. What's he mean here? Members which bear the brunt of the war's impact. Okay, well, okay. I thought that they're responsible for the war's impact, but yeah. So either way, that's wrong. The brunt of the war's impact is on Ukraine, its society and its economy, and the other economies that bear the brunt, the European members. This is all on Russia. This is all on Putin. It's all on him. Are growing more disenchanted with Washington's Ukrainian proxy war. Actually, support is still high. So where's the stats? I want stats. I want you to back that up. Are growing more disenchanted with Washington's Ukrainian proxy war. Give me the evidence. In fact, let's just go and look for some right now. So the most comprehensive stats I could quickly find were from October. So these are going to be out of date. But the headline is support for Ukraine remains unabated. The lowest is Germany, 69%. Highest is Poland, 80%. Basically, all between sort of those areas. Actually, Netherlands, 66%. So it is still really, really high. Even if there are some dips in that, you know, as people will be a little bit concerned with other things in their lives, energy, cost of living, and all that kind of stuff. Does that constitute growing more disenchanted with Washington's Ukrainian proxy war? No, they're growing disenchanted with life in general, with the economy, and feeling that that's becoming more important to them. So, you know, it's how you frame that. European populations are openly questioning the veracity of claims in the press about the Russian state and American aims in Europe. He's got a link to a YouTube video. As we all know, YouTube is completely wrong. So anything you see on YouTube is obviously wrong. Right-wing Emmy go home protest in Leipzig, counter protest expected. So he's put a right-wing protest. So for like what looks like sort of far right sympathies in Germany, right-wing protests, and a video that's his support that they're openly questioning the veracity of claims in the press about the Russian state. I don't know. I'd have to watch that video to see whether in this 4 hours. I need to see whether they actually challenge the press claims in this 4-hour protest video. But I'm not going to sit through 4 hours of far right extremism. So if that's what indeed it is, the influx of millions of refugees from Ukraine, along with a combination of trade disputes, profiteering from US arms sales, there's an interesting debate in that, and high energy prices risks turning European public opinion against both Washington's war and NATO. Yeah, but has it? And will it? Might risk that happening, but where's the evidence that that is actually happening? I mean, there's a risk of a nuclear war tomorrow, or indeed, aliens landing. Yeah, but okay, what's the actual percentage chance of that happening? Russia has also undergone a transformation in the opening years of President Putin's term of office. The Russian armed forces were organized, trained, and equipped for exclusively national territorial defense, but the conduct of a special military operation in Ukraine. Oh, wow. He's not even calling it a war in Ukraine, has demonstrated the inadequacy of this approach for Russia's national security in the 21st century. The opening phase of the SMO. Oh, my goodness. What do I think of Conor McGregor? He is Putin lickspittle. Yeah. The opening phase of the SMO was a limited operation with a narrow purpose and restricted goals. The critical point is that Moscow never intended to do more than persuade Kiev and Washington that, again, he's using the Russian spelling of Kiev as Kiev, and Washington that Moscow would fight to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO, as well as a further mistreatment of Russians in Ukraine. This is Putin apologism. This is actually what Liz Cheney was saying. I'd agree. The SMO was, however, based on invalid assumptions and was terminated. As it turned out, the limited nature of the SMO achieved the opposite of the outcome that Moscow desired, conveying the impression of weakness rather than strength. After concluding that the underpinning assumptions regarding Washington's readiness to negotiate and compromise were invalid, Putin directed the Stavka to develop new operational plans with new goals. First, to crush the Ukrainian enemy. Second, to remove any doubt in Washington and European capitals that Russia will establish victory on its own terms. And third, to create a new territorial status quo commensurate with Russia's national security needs. Once a new plan was submitted and approved, President Putin agreed to an economy of force operation to defend Russian territorial gains with minimal forces until the required resources, capabilities, and manpower were assembled for decisive operations. Putin also appointed a new theatre commander, General Surovikin, a senior officer who understands the mission and possesses the mindset to deliver success. Wow. So he says nothing here about Surovikin being morally reprehensible, a butcher, and just basically a terrible human being. No sort of moral valuation of Surovikin, just someone who can deliver success. I guess that's true, but all of this reads as though it is written by a Russian. That's what you need to know so far. The coming offensive phase of the conflict will provide a glimpse of the new Russian force that is emerging and its future capabilities. At this writing, 540,000 Russian combat forces are assembled in southern Ukraine, western Russia, and Belarus. The numbers continue to grow, but the numbers already include 1,000 rocket artillery systems, thousands of tactical ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, yada, 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 yada. This force has little in common with the Russian army that intervened 9 months ago on February 24th, 2022. He says, but he earlier on talked about a quick, where was it? Military industrial capacity to rapidly scale up its military power. That took 9 months and a almost mass mobilization, where they've really struggled to do that. And he's having to borrow loads of vehicles off Belarus and get loads of forced mobilized conscripts. Just no. It's now possible to project that the new Russian armed forces that will evolve from the crucible of war in Ukraine will be designed to execute strategically decisive operations. The resulting Russian force will likely take its inspiration from the Forces of Iron operational framework recommended in Colonel General Mahmoud Ghari's work, If War Comes Tomorrow, The Contours of Future Armed Conflict. The new military establishment will consist of much larger forces in being that can conduct decisive operations on relatively short notice with minimal reinforcement and preparation. That all sounds lovely, but where's the evidence of that? And it seems like they're actually breaking down to smaller units and companies rather than these large BTGs and ideas that I think you will see in Ghari's work. Correct me if I'm wrong. Put differently, by the time the conflict ends, it appears Washington would have prompted the Russian state to build up its military power, the very opposite of the fetal weakening that Washington intended. No. Russia is fundamentally weakened. Them putting up 500,000 mobilized troops is not is not all strengthening of its power, it's showing how terribly weak it is when it embarked on its course of military confrontation with Moscow. So, yeah, again, I basically disagree with every paragraph. But none of these developments should surprise anyone in Washington, D.C., beginning with Biden's speech in Warsaw, effectively demanding regime change in Moscow. Look, mate, you fought in the US Army at a time when they were open about regime change. You wanted regime change. You were fighting for that. You were part of the armed forces. That was one of your main considerations prior to 9/11. The Biden administration refused to see foreign policy in terms of strategy, like a stupid general who insists on defending every inch of ground to the last man. President Biden confirmed the United States' commitment to oppose Russia and potentially any nation state that fails to measure up to globalism's hypocritical democratic standards, regardless of the cost to the American people, whether in terms of their security or prosperity. I mean, he needs to really explain what he's talking about here. Commitment to oppose Russia is correct. Russia are the aggressor. Again, let's go reduce it to really simplistic terms. If someone is weak and being beaten up on the other side of the road, take an old granny being beaten up by a bully on the other side of the road, do you just sit there and go and watch them and go, well, it's not my fight? Or do you go and help the granny? Do you at some point say, hey granny, you're being beaten up? Well, if I was you, I would just give him your purse and let him be done with it. Just give him your purse. That's fine. Is that all right? I've appeased this situation. We've got peace now. Great. The thug's gone off, given her a black eye, and taken her purse. And I've asked her to give him her purse. So I've been involved in this peacemaking. Yeah, well done, brilliant. Well, that's nice. That all ended nicely, didn't it? Or do you, if you had the ability because you were stronger than the thug, go over and force the thug to stop beating up the weaker granny? The latter is the morally correct thing to do. I don't know where MacGregor sits morally, but it's not where I sit. If we met down a pub, we wouldn't get on. Biden's speech in Warsaw was hot with emotion and mired in the ideology of moralizing globalism that is popular in Washington, London, Paris, and Berlin. But for Moscow, the speech was tantamount to a Carthaginian peace plan. Biden's take no prisoners conduct of US foreign policy means the outcome of the next phase of the Ukrainian war will not only destroy the Ukrainian state, it will also demolish a bit of grammar issue there. It will also demolish the last vestiges of the post-war liberal order and produce a dramatic shift in power and influence across Europe, especially in Berlin, away from Washington and Moscow, and to a limited extent to Beijing. It will also demolish the last vestiges of the post-war liberal order. No, it won't. It's trying to uphold that. You absolute muppet. I say that with all due respect because I don't think you're due respect. It's precisely fighting to maintain post-war liberal order, to stop a dramatic shift of power and influence over to the axis of Russia and China. It's the exact opposite of what he says. Oh, I could spend so much more time on this. I mean, that's the end of the article, but I could spend time going to town on this. I don't think it's worth it. Like Colonel MacGregor, Douglas MacGregor has a warped sense of morality. Morality is, politics is morality. So your politics is a subset of morality. Well, usually you think about morality as what you would do on a daily basis as an individual. Well, politics is that writ large across society. So what you would do as a society, what should happen. Anything that involves a should or an ought is a moral. It has a moral dimension. So politics is just morality, and his politics, and in terms of war strategizing here, and geopolitics, is thoroughly problematic. And it seems like he just wants to appease authoritarian leadership, and he for some reason likes Putin. Yeah, I wouldn't give Douglas MacGregor's opinions a live day, really. And if Tucker Carlson is giving credence to this guy, then that says all you need to know about Tucker Carlson, is my opinion. But yeah, I hope that was useful. That was stream of consciousness. None of that was prepared on reading that. I briefly looked over the Wikipedia entry, like literally skim read it and saw this word and pulled that one up and thought I'd be talking about the political compass. My advice to all of you is go and take the political compass test, see where you sit around on the political compass. But Douglas MacGregor sits in a very different place to what I do, and I would hope that most of you watching this, even if you are conservative, and there'll be 50% of you who are conservative, even if you're conservative, I hope you'll recognise that what he has written is fundamentally wrong and problematic. I could go into more detail, but this has been long enough. Anyway, Toodle Pips, thanks for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share, and catch you later.